Welcome to Baltimore, my home city. Okay, I'm just curious because I did this exact same panel at TrotCon and only 2 people showed up. What explains this? Okay, what? Okay. If you're interested in very boring long history, raise your hand. If you're interested in tarot cards, raise your hand.
A little bit more. Okay.
If you're interested in the history of My Little Pony fandom, raise your hand.
And all the same hands come back.
It still doesn't explain why you guys are coming here and missing the Flufflepuff meet and greet. Okay, so this is, yeah, I know. So what this is this is actually the second time I did this panel at a Brony convention. I normally do it at anime and comic conventions because it's a mixed medium story because My Little Pony only makes up 1/22nd, 27th of like this whole entire period. I look at a period of 100 years and My Little Pony is just the very tip at the end here. So if that's what you guys are interested in, then yeah, happy to be here. The only other problem is this is a very visual panel because I would normally have an image of the tarot card and an image of the author and the work that each is corresponding to, but at the moment we don't have a PowerPoint and our other 2 panelists aren't here at the moment. So I'm going to try to kind of go through the history myself, long, boring, Professor Glenn Beck style lectures. And if there's anything that interests you, just stop me and then we will discuss a certain event, okay? So I don't have a chalkboard, so I can't do the professor thing for the board. But we're going to start with, I guess, how I started this whole entire event. So I'm a pre-med student, but I'm a very big fan of art as an art form. That means the art of, sorry, this wheel. Okay, we're going to ignore them. I'm interested in like the art of storytelling, the art of how mediums are used, and one of the interesting persons who actually inspired me to look at art in a different manner is comics writer Alan Moore, because he specifically said that art is magic. It isn't that art is like magic, but art is magic. The process of magic is actually creating something from out of nothing and using it and having, like, it has an effect on the audience that transforms the user's awareness and consciousness. That's what a magic spell is. You basically put a few words together, you throw it to a person, and that changes their reaction. That's what he believes art is. And movies, television, comics, that's what it should be. It should be a form of magic. And he was criticizing how, ever since the Victorian era, all preceding works seem to be dumbed down full of copies. Kind of like inbreeding. Like, after a few generations of using the same gene pool, you have some really, really ugly looking kids at the very end. And if you guys are a comics fan, you know Alan Moore is driving, oh, I hate that they're making Watchmen 2. Look at Superman in his red underwear cape. They're trying to make a new movie about it. I'm gonna go back to my house and smoke some weed. You know, that's Alan Moore. He's basically very angry about that. And if you guys know about his League of Extraordinary Gentlemen character novel, comic book series, he basically takes all his favorite Victorian superheroes, action heroes together and puts them into a story. He obviously loves them despite all the racism and colonialism that happened during that time. Yet, in the new League of Extraordinary Gentlemen that takes place in 2009, he has Harry Potter as the villain. So he's basically saying the racist, great white hunter of Africa, Alan Quatermain, is supposed to be superior art, while Harry Potter is lower inferior art. So we're going to look at how far history and entertainment has come since the Victorian era to the modern day to see how this all leads up. Before I begin, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm known as Stratos on DeviantArt and South Park Dallas. You guys might know me from my blog, Chocolate Pony and Firefly. I'm going to let my other, new panelists introduce themselves.
My name is Skended. I am a reporter for Jerky Hooves News.
And I am Periwinkle. I am one of the directors at Celestial Radio.
Two media people. So sorry if I'm kind start first at the Victorian era and see how pop culture actually came to be. You guys hear the word pop culture all the time. It comes from the word popular culture. But popular culture did not exist until Jane Austen existed. Because before then, the only stories that could be told were printed on books. And back then they didn't have any printing presses. So the only people who could afford the books are the rich upper class. Now, when printing presses started becoming popular in the Victorian era, Jane Austen started writing just slice of life stories about her middle-aged class musings. And the middle-aged people started reading it and were like, this is very interesting. It's almost like we're high class now. So middle-class people decided to form little book clubs and get together. And they were saying, we want to see more high class now. So we need to give an excuse to why we like Jane Austen stuff. It's not because she's just talking about us. There must be some merit in her storytelling. And that's how literary criticism came to be. It's just because a bunch of rich, white, middle-class people got together and said, we really like that Jane Austen is writing about us. How can we make ourselves seem more upper class? Around that time, you had a new type of work being formed called genre works. These were science fiction stories, pulp stories, fantasy stories, and they started becoming more and more popular. So to distinguish themselves between the more popular genre works that the lower class enjoyed, the middle class started calling their form of art literature and started calling the lower forms entertainment or products. Is there info on that?
No.
Well, let's start with the first part. So originally, I had tarot cards explain every single one of my points. And you guys know I actually do the My Little Pony tarot cards. So let's start with the very first card. Who's Derby? Who's Derby here? We start with the first card, the Fool. Now, a lot of people are thinking I chose Derby as the Fool because she's a foolish pony, but that's not the point. In traditional tarot, the Fool represents the start of the journey. And there's probably no better character to represent the birth of the Brony fandom than Derby. Because it was Derby being posted on 4chan that ignited this whole entire Brony fandom. So we could kind of say that it was middle-class people who started this whole entire idea of pop culture and separate literatures. Now, we're going to start at October 10th, 1911. Now, what's so special about October 10th, 1911? Does anyone know why that date's important and why I chose it for the start of our journey? 1911. That was the very day that the Chinese Revolution happened that overthrew the Qing Dynasty. Now, people, like Alan Moore wants to say, everything started going downhill since the end of the Victorian era. Now, the Victorian era was just one part of a whole entire massive culture. Around the same time was the Japanese Meiji period and the Chinese Qing Dynasty. All of them started falling around 1910. But it really started with October 10th, 1911 with the Chinese Revolution. And I specifically chose that that date because the Chinese, they rose a flag on that day. It's not the new communist red flag and stars flag. It was a simple flag, white sky, it was a blue sky and white sun. And what does that white sun remind you of? Celestia's cutie mark. So we're going to use that as the mark of the rising sun of how all this became to be. And on that exact same day in Britain, Peter Pan was published. And I'm going to tell you why Peter Pan was unique. Peter Pan existed as a play before then. Everyone, if you were upper class or middle class, could see that play. But before then, none of the lower class people could see Peter Pan. It was only when it was finally published as a book that was affordable for lower class children. And that's where we get the idea of now a separation between literature, something read for the elites that's brainy, hard to read, and something that's fun that anyone can read, even a child. It's kind of like Harry Potter nowadays. Now, let's quickly move through because we have 22 cards to go through. Peter Pan, I would say, represented the magician. Now, we're going to move to you guys just feel with me because I'm going to be rambling if I don't have my PowerPoints up here. Okay, actually, how many people have knowledge of the occult or tarot? How many people know Aleister Crowley? Do you guys know that every single, all our modern day perceptions of black magic, Satanism, secret societies, all came from Aleister Crowley? Do you know he was the inspiration? Yeah. Did you know that every single dark wizard in British fiction has been inspired by Aleister Crowley? The first one was Oliver Hazard. It was a book called The Magician that talked about a black dark magician who wanted to bring about the so-called Moonchild to end the world. In Rosemary Baby, which was the first Exorcist movie, the Dark Priest was inspired by Aleister Crowley. And even Lord Voldemort in the new Harry Potter story was inspired by Aleister Crowley. So we come to the number 2 card, the High Priestess or the High Priest, which kind of represents Aleister Crowley's influence during this time. Because we started around this period, the Victorian era, it's the industrial age. But what does industry bring? It brings an age of materialism. People start moving away from faith and stuff and more towards money. That's when you have big business trying to corrupt and make the lower class even lower, keeping them poor. Now we are moving around the age of World War I. People are coming back from war. People are becoming upset with this industrial period of colonialism, materialism, and they're starting to move to a new age of faith and spiritualism. And while people start readapting traditional religions, a lot of people start moving more to the occult. Even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the very deductive Sherlock Holmes series, you expect him to be a really reasonable, deductive man. But he started moving towards this new period. He actually wrote Sherlock Holmes because he actually didn't like the whole calculating ideas of the Victorian era. And actually, if you read some of his magazines he published around this time, they actually promote the ideas like theories exist and there are magical beings. So we're moving them now to a new age of spiritualism. And that means we open the world of the imagination and the abstract world. Which means people are now starting to explore new stories. Around this time, we had the birth of the film medium. We had movies like Birth of a Nation, which was the first feature-length film. People were actually looking at different ways to the medium. Before then, people were just filming plays. It was around this time people realized, oh, we can actually move the camera a little bit and zoom in. Oh, a fantastic improvement. We could actually do a montage, because if you look at some of the earlier films, you'll show a fireman climbing the ladder, taking the woman, cut. And they'll show a woman in a burning building, the fireman coming in and taking the woman out. Then they realized, show the fireman coming in, woman, fireman, woman. So people started looking at new ways to experiment with new mediums. And that's where we get to the modern age. Exactly 10 years after we started in October 10th, 1911, we come to 1921, 10 years after our start, and we come to the Empress card. Now the Empress represents birth and nurturing. We're going to start, most modern scholars mark the start of modern literature with James Joyce. He wrote on the exact day of, he published a book on 1921 called Ulysses, and that was considered the first modern novel. I guess you guys know anything about Ulysses? No. Sure, it's getting boring, but it does make sense. It all adds up to My Little Pony, I think. You guys had to pick out these little notes. But anyways, Ulysses was invented. That was very important. The next card I want to go to is the next card, the Empress. Now, in this card, I have Lauren Faust being represented. Now, you guys might be confused why I'm the Emperor, why Lauren Faust is the Emperor. You have to realize what the Emperor represents. He represents the foundation, the building blocks. The number 4 represents the 4 corners of a foundation of a house. It represents the 4 elements, it represents the 4 directions, it represents the 4 bases of DNA building. Around this time was the Jazz Age, or the Lost Period, when all these authors started coming back from World War I, trying to experiment with new forms and new ways to tell stories. We also had the idea of experimentation around this time. You had there was a play called Three Penny Opera that was really popular around this time. It actually inspired Alan Moore. You guys, it might be hard to believe, but Alan Moore was inspired by this play. But the idea of this play was to show a division, that there was a clear division between the fictional world and the real world. The characters in the play purposely acted fake, so that you knew that these were characters on the stage, and that if the actions on the stage could be changed, that means that if the real world is a stage, your actions could be changed. So this is where we get the idea of art and storytelling being represented as magic. People could enact change. People could write certain things, not to entertain, but to force a type of improvement into people. That way to explain. Let's move to the more interesting parts. You like Superman, right? Okay, first drawing ever done by a human. The very first drawings on the caves were pictures of oxen and animals. They were the very first visual images and the first words. Because right now we think of the division between text and words and images and pictures. But back then, words and pictures were the exact same thing. That oxen on the cage was the word for ox, and it was also an image of an ox. During that time period, we saw a division between the abstract textual forms and the more material visual forms. Visual forms were more accurate representations of something, while texts were more abstract representations of something. And you saw a period of division. You could see, like, for example, Chinese characters nowadays still have, their characters kind of still look like what images they're based off of. But we really didn't see a unity between text and words for a long time. People just either wrote novels or painted pictures. A few times people tried to make illuminated text or Emaki scrolls, but it never really happened until The Yellow Kid was the first comic strip ever published in, I think, 1896. And it was unique because it not only had word bubbles, but interplay between the two characters, actually finally combining text and visuals together. And this is where we come to Action Comics, Superman. Exactly 20 years after the start of our journey, we now have Superman being published, the first superhero, which would inspire a birth of a whole entire new franchise and medium and the comics genre. Now, comic books, you might think, are its own separate category, but you might not realize that comic books during this time period actually influenced animation and cartoons around this time. One of the first shows, animated shows actually made was Popeye. It was when the creators of Superman actually were watching Popeye that they realized what would happen if we actually took these characters and made them more realistic in a superhero format. And that's where we got Superman. So we move on from there and we come all the way now to Citizen Kane. You guys ever heard of Citizen Kane before? Okay. Now, do you guys think that film critics are really snooty for calling it the best movie of all time? Or do you think it's justified for being called the best movie of all time? Okay. Okay. I'm gonna ask some of you. We'll try to make it more interactive. Raise your hands. You guys will, win prizes or cards. But why don't you guys explain to me a reason why you like Citizen Kane and why you don't like Citizen Kane, if you guys ever seen the movie?
Yeah, I've seen the movie. I can answer that question.
Obviously, card.
Trying to card. The reason I like Citizen Kane is as a media person or as a person who's been involved in media, the person that Citizen Kane was based off of was, and his name right now is completely escaping me, William Randolph Hearst, who was a major media mogul at the time. I mean, he'd basically be compared to the News Corp of our generation for the amount of media that he controlled. And with the amount of media that he was controlling, he also basically controlled viewpoints and the opinions of all these different, and he used it to kind of force his own philosophical beliefs and moral beliefs onto the people who read his stuff. So Citizen Kane came out at the time that this was all still going on. So William Randolph Hearst was alive and knew that this movie was basically about him, and it was a very brave thing for Orson Welles to put out.
Yeah.
While also the cinematic aspects of the movie, and this is my highest praise from it. The actual cinematography of the movie is, I would say, still unmatched today by any cinematographer. The thing I don't like is, since I wasn't born in that time, and it's a little dry and boring.
You look at it now and you see, for example, montages, pans in, looking up at ceilings, different camera visuals that you see in almost every film nowadays. But Citizen Kane was the film that actually invented all these things. It was a unique work because not only did it define the film industry, it showed that this is a brand new medium. Until then, film hasn't really been experimented or used in this ways. They were still just trying to record theater plays. Now he's saying, look, you guys are just trying to do this for money. Let me show you what this medium can actually do. Let me show you what types of stories can actually be told with film. Because there are certain things that you can do with film that you obviously can't do with
Yet the whole thematic thing is that he died completely alone. There was no one in the room to hear his last words. So how do they know that his last words were Rosebud?
Exactly. That's a good point. But I kind of bring Citizen Kane. Exactly.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's okay. No, no. It's like you guys. Exactly, because there are things that you can do. That's actually the reason why I kind of like Alan Moore's philosophy. He writes comics unfilmable not because he wants to, I don't want my movies being filmed. He makes them purposely unfilmable because he wants to prove that there are things comic books can do that a novel cannot do, that a movie cannot do. And I kind of bring up Orson Welles in this case because he's going to fall into the same category where I categorize Alan Moore, John Kay, and even eventually Warren Faust when he comes around. Good. See, I'm actually building up to my little pony. Ponies are still working their ways in. Actually, let's go to the more interesting parts. You guys are Doctor Who fans, probably, right? You guys know Doctor Who is celebrating its 50th this year. So Doctor Who actually, started in 1961. In 1963, sorry. But around this time was actually the age of science fiction. Because around this time you had the Silver Age of comics. Not only that, you had Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit was written initially during World War II, but you had Lord of the Rings being written around this time, and that defined a new genre called high fantasy. And then you had British science fiction writer Alan Moorcock writing new wave science fiction stories that defined the new gritty type of science fiction stories being told. Yes?
We're touching on the fact that Doctor Who was actually originally supposed to be an educational show where they wanted to talk about the science, but also bring in history as well, bringing it back and forth in time.
Good point right there. I actually have not watched a lot of the original Doctor Who, so I
My grandmother watched it when she was actually in England when they were first airing it.
It is the longest running television series.
Yeah, it is. I brought it up because around this time, back in America, Star Trek was being made around this time. And then again, Lord of the Rings. And this is where actually we start getting division because I told you beforehand we have works considered literature and genre being kind of separated. Now we have different forms of genre works becoming separated. Because as I mentioned, Michael Moorcock was responsible for new wave science fiction, where he wanted the reader to feel sick and like bad at the end of the story. The future was always very grim, very dark. There was no hope at all. And he actually really, really hated Lord of the Rings, which he called and compared to Winnie the Pooh. And he wrote an essay called The Epic Pooh, saying how much he hates Lord of the Rings, and he eventually updated it to include Harry Potter. And again, it's no coincidence that Michael Moorcock is a very good close friend of Alan Moore, but I don't know where all these Moore people are coming from who hate Harry Potter.
There's just more and more.
Exactly. But he didn't like the idea of, in Lord of the Rings, you wake up in a safe little secure shire, and then you go out to a big, scary, dangerous world where everything's bad, and eventually you return nice, safely at home. Kind of like Winnie the Pooh. And that's where fantasy started becoming more high fantasy and becoming a little more safe and magical and reassuring, while science fiction started becoming more dark, philosophical, and gritty. Yeah, okay. But because we have Doctor Who fans, we're going to bring this up. And I started mentioning Star Trek because around this time we were entering the counterculture. Now, the next card we have would be considered the Lust card. It's actually called the Strength card, but Aleister Crowley rechanged it to the Lust. And that's where it represents the counterculture period, the 60s. It started with the Beat Generation during the 50s. You have Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac writing all these new types of stories. It was also around this time people started making parodies of different works. You had Mad Magazine finally making satires of Superman, Mickey Mouse, and all this stuff. And you had people who started writing fan fiction. And as you guys are all my little pony fans, I think it might be interesting to talk a bit about the history of fan fiction. Not only that, because Alan Moore likes fan fiction himself. You guys might not know, but the most recent comic book Alan Moore published, even though he hates that people were writing fan fictions of Watchmen, he actually wrote a fan fiction of H.P. Lovecraft's Mountains of Madness. Yes. Exactly. Actually, I'll move into Alan Moore later. We have a very big thing about Alan Moore, and then John K. the animation renaissance. But but one of the things he actually did was he rewrote the whole entire Mountains of Madness, and people started calling him a plagiarist, but he says, no, it's not, I'm not plagiarizing, I'm part of a literary game. So fan fiction is called a literary game for him. So if you guys ever want to write fan fiction, protect yourself, call it a literary game. But he actually has a very interesting point, because back in America during the Gilded period, you had Edgar Allan Poe. He wrote the story of a man from Nantucket. I think his name was Arthur Pym. He started sailing to the South Pole, and he reached Antarctica, and the story stopped there. Jules Verne loved this story so much, he continued it with called, I think, Adventures at the Arctic, where he had the same character continuing and finally landing in Antarctica and started going further until he reached a point where he could not stop because the compasses started going crazy. And this was called the Iron Mountains. H.P. Lovecraft loved that story so much, he continued with the Mountains of Madness. And then Alan Moore loved that story so much, he continued with his Nemo Heart of Ice story. So you see, fan fiction is kind of like a literary game. He does have a point. It's been all the way back during the Greek tales. Jason and the Argonauts took every single famous Greek character and threw them all in a big bolt and had them all have fun and find a golden fleece and stuff. That's a question.
Well, just obvious that it's fanfic, at least factual, they actually use it.
Yeah. He was kind of like George Lucas around the time, allowing people to actually make derivatives within his own Cthulhu mythos. But modern fan fiction started with actually the Tijuana Bibles during the 1920s. Does anyone know anything about Tijuana Bibles? Okay. Alan Moore loves Tijuana Bibles. Again, they all connect back to Alan Moore. But Tijuana Bibles were small 8-page comic booklets that basically had famous cartoon characters like Popeye or Betty Boop, or famous movie stars, and just basically had them having sex with other characters. So fan fiction started with having sex with other characters. So the idea of fan fiction characters having sex is not a new thing. It's kind of died down. And then finally, in the 60s, when Star Trek came up, we started having Star Trek fans, which were considered really the first modern fandom. And what did the first Star Trek fans do? Ship Kirk and Spock together. And the first modern fanfics were basically Kirk and Spock fanfictions. So now, around this period, we coincides with what's called the underground comics movement, which was happening in San Francisco around the 60s and 70s. It was mostly because Robert Crumb, one of the famous comic book artists, came to San Francisco, and then this whole entire counterculture movement where people, instead of publishing through the main distributors, DC and Marvel Comics, because all they did was publish superhero stories. In what other medium do you publish in only one genre, where 99% of all your stories are one genre, just superheroes, superheroes, superheroes? So people started making all these new underground comics, and because they weren't restricted by the Comics Code Authority, sex, and drugs, and violence. And people started realizing, hey, if Mad Magazine can make fun of Mickey Mouse, why can't we? And then we had a new comics group called the Ear Pirates. Does anyone know anything about the Ear Pirates? Okay, if you guys don't know about the Ear Pirates, it was basically a bunch of drugged out hippies who were saying, Mickey Mouse ruined my childhood and working for the military-industrial complex. Disney himself is a plagiarist. Every single Disney movie is basically copying Christian Andersen or Grimm Brothers fairy tale. So to get back at Walt Disney, we're actually going to make the worst Mickey Mouse comic book ever. It's going to have Mickey Mouse having sex, doing drug trafficking, doing violence, all this stuff. And they wrote this really, really grim and gritty Mickey Mouse deconstruction that basically was really not safe for work, and kids would confuse the cover and mistake it for a real Mickey Mouse story. You guys start seeing comparison now with the Brony fandom now, right? Okay, so when they published this book, they started barricading themselves in their little hideout called the Air Pirates Hideout in San Francisco, which they actually put the ad for their hideout, secret hideout in the magazine so everyone could know where they are, which was kind of weird. But started barricading themselves like, Disney, we're ready for you. And Disney did nothing. They're like, we just did something that was significant. Why isn't Disney barging through our doors and destroying everything? So they realized, hey, one of our friends is a Disney, his father works on the Disney board of directors. And and he said, "Here, can you sneak this into your dad's board meeting?" Like, sure. Disney sued them right afterwards. They argued that, yeah, because their characters were not like Mickey Mouse knockoffs. They weren't like Donald. What was it, Donald? That thing, that creepy. Dolan the duck. It was not. It was obviously Mickey Mouse. Kids would obviously confuse them for being Disney corporate characters. So Disney sued them. And what did they do after they were sued? They wrote another sequel. But this time, Disney was in drug rehab. Mickey Mouse was in drug rehab, and he was healed because the air pirates came and saved him. So Disney sued them again. And this time, they got Congress on their side, and they passed the copyright protection law, which extended copyrights. All copyright laws were extended 50 to 75 years past the author's death date. And this is also nicknamed the Mickey Mouse Protection Law because of Disney's support in this. So this is now, we're starting to see the division now of the fan culture and the corporate culture. Corporate culture wanting to protect the copyrighted characters, and fan culture wanting to express their love of their characters. Yes?
Don't you think, because naturally the same thing,
Yeah.
don't you think that the artists really need to do that? Now, I think it's unfair, they're using art
Yeah.
that somebody else created, and then they're not getting paid for it.
That's actually where we start moving in, because every single medium, animation, film, novels, the writers have full protection and copyrights. You scan my comic book, you scan my novel, and you download my DVD. But historically, it was not, the comic book artists were not protected. The people who created Superman, Jack Kirby, who created basically all the Avengers in the Marvel Universe, all of them were living in poor conditions, penniless, while Marvel and DC were profiting off Marvel movies and Superman movies. So historically, comic book artists were not protected under this new law.
Eventually Disney bought anyway.
Yes, eventually. Yes.
There's actually just been a report that came out this past week that there was this study that was done finding the direct consequence of that law. There are huge amounts of literature in the middle of the 20th century that are completely inaccessible. The people who own them don't have the resources to finish them, and because of that law, they're not in the open.
In the public
It is
sphere.
true.
So they basically have this huge chunk of literature dead.
You're actually right about that, because I was looking for actually this presentation. I was actually going to talk about the Great American Novel as well. So I was looking at all these works considered the Great American Novel, and I found some works that actually sound really interesting. I wanted to read them, and I looked and I found out you could buy them on eBay for $4 million because there's no way to scan these things and make them accessible. So now we have the copyright protection laws. Companies are protected, but the people who created these works are not protected at all. So here we come to an age of corporations controlling things. We come to the 70s, which is now the comic book Bronze Ages, where now people are dealing with drugs and sex and let's make money. Oh, we could actually save time animating by not animating. We could have the same He-Man looking this way doing.
It was Hanna-Barbera who
Yeah.
came up with a lot of those. It was like with Yogi Bear's collar to avoid, because when you're animating, most of your animation goes towards the head and the face,
Yeah.
because that's what people are focusing on. With the collar, that made it so that you could animate his head, and people wouldn't pay attention to anything below the collar. So you wouldn't have to do the animations for
And you notice
his
this
body.
nozzle never opened at all. It was a flat nozzle with just a little mouth on top of it. And that's why you see Japanese anime doing the exact same thing nowadays.
Anime is the one that did it in American
I actually do move into that too, because it was a lot of the American animations that inspired Japan after World War II, before coming back to inspire the animation Renaissance. But before we could go to a Renaissance, we always had to go through a dark age. We now reach the comics dark ages. It's the animation dark ages. All works are kind of basic crap. All comic books are basic crap. There was a bit of hope with, like, there's a hope card, I don't know. But the hope card was represented by George Lucas. I'm going to say George Lucas was supposed to be the new hope, because around this time we had the studio system. Hey, you came just in time to talk about George Lucas. Or you go with the Mr. Plinkett voice.
It was sitting, warming his seat.
It's my favorite flavor. Plastic.
So this is actually my co-host on the Tumblr podcast, Flavin Vago.
Hello?
Yeah.
So we're now reaching George Lucas because during this time period, all movies were under what's called the studio system, where actually it was a studio system where the studios would fund the movies. And then during the 60s, we had that period called New Hollywood, where now independent artists were making all these fantastic new films like Bonnie and Clyde, Taxi Driver, even Jaws was very popular because it was under its own independent status. But studios were realizing Jaws just made a bunch of money. It broke the blocks. Oh my God, it's a blockbuster. So this is where we get the birth of blockbusters and summer hits. And studios are realizing, well, independent artists are finding a really, really hard time making these movies on their own. So how about we pay them to do we supply them the money and supplies, but they had to kind of change the scripts to fit us. And this is where we started coming to the studio system again. And George Lucas actually had the chance he did that with the original Star Wars. He tried to create a work that was completely his own, that was not interfered by any of the studios, and that was really good, but we had Phantom Menace.
Well,
That's just jumping too far.
That's jumping ahead
But
in history.
around this period, again, this is the period where people started wanting to make money. Now Hollywood is thinking we could make money making all these.
I'm sorry, when
blockbuster
was there a
films and
period when
sequels.
people didn't want to make money?
Exactly!
The reason why I started is so us, the people,
Yeah.
can go see movies. So that's how you make money. And no, I mean, this is what this country was founded on, money and free religion.
Exactly.
Honestly, I mean, so let's not get away
This country, so let's go back to Britain, where one man was sitting in his dark magical cave, looking at the world, saying, movies are crap, animation are crap, comic books are crap, what am I gonna do?
Is this Arnold Schwarzenegger?
This is Alan Moore. So now we get back to our lover, Alan Moore. He's going to start this whole entire period where he realizes, I'm not going to make Watchmen or I'm not going to make any of my comic books for money. I want to make these works because I want to tell really good stories. I want to show what the comics medium could do. Because until then, people are just saying, here is an action, here are words, here are some scenes, here are some words. He wants to say, look, the panels could actually change, zoom in, move, pan out. These are things that you can't do with film. You can't stay still and let the audience zoom back and forth between panels and take their time to experience it. And at the same time, this is stuff that literature cannot do because you don't have the visual connection to actually connect with these characters emotionally. You guys, I'm gonna go for hours on Watchmen, so I'm gonna have Flavin come in to save me.
Well, yeah, it's true. He will go on for hours about Watchmen.
He knows that.
We'll just talk about
but
him.
we both know Scott McCloud understanding comic, right? Understanding
Yes,
comics.
I absolutely do know Scott McCloud's understanding comics.
Good. So you know things that comics medium can do that the other mediums cannot do?
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's kind of true of any medium. Every medium
Exactly.
has its strength over others that others can't really
And
do.
that's what he wanted to prove. He wanted to show that each medium is in the visual, that each medium can be good. There are certain stories that should only be told as novels, there are certain stories that should only be told as a television series, certain things that can only be done as film. If you try to make the exact same story, exact same genres for every single medium, it becomes a restrictive straitjacket because you're trying to fit the exact same story, which could be told in a long novel, and now into a 2-hour film. Yeah. And some things, like
The
even if
Simpsons
some
movie?
things should be filmed live, but even some things that should be filmed live shouldn't even be a 2-hour movie because you don't have time to connect with the characters. That's why we had television shows. You had to look at both time frame, character interaction, where you could connect with characters. So Alan Moore really, really hoped to bring in a new period, a revival. He hoped that afterwards every single comic book author was going to go, this is really good. I'm going to try to expand the medium now. But
Sorry.
what they did was just basically say, hey, watch Rorschach killed people and he was cool. Let's make grim superheroes who just had horrible backstories and just killed people. And that's where we get the comics Dark Ages. Oh, so sad.
Sorry, you in the pink shirt back there. Do you have a question?
Yeah, aren't there a few exceptions? You say that all books are bad.
Some books I think are better made to be, some stories that were written initially as books should have been made as movies first. But because most independent authors do not have enough money to film their own movie, it's sometimes better for them to write the story they envision themselves as a story first, and then have it adapted into a movie that would better fit the movie medium.
I think
In the last couple of years, we heard like all the books came out, like the Harry Potter,
Yep.
that's better than the book. They took so much out of the movie, they showed the difference in the book.
Exactly.
You hear that concept. Can't have it now.
Yeah.
this is
Sometimes they're good, like Lord of the Rings.
It can't be the Langoliers with Stephen
But
King.
that's the point, like, because Alan Moore's stories were started translating into movies, but because his stories are so vastly different, they could not fit the story medium. So the only similarities with his original stories were just the titles themselves. So it's like, if you're going to make a completely new story, why don't you just make a new story? Don't just copy something. It's like photocopying the same photocopy over and over again. Eventually, it will just be dull. It's inbreeding the ugly child over and over again. It's not going to work.
One medium right now in our current generation that's kind of going through this struggle is the video game industry. Because video games are trying to find their step on, how do we tell a story through video games? How do we create an experience through video games? And there's been some pretty great strides in that. A favorite one of mine recently was Spec Ops: The Line. Has anybody played that?
Yeah, yep.
I'd say it was a very, very well told story, and one that you couldn't do through a book or through even a television show.
I noticed that, like Bioshock Infinite, for example. I remember just the first part where I'm just kind of looking at the World's Fair, like just a little carnival game, seeing the little characters talking back and forth. You can't do that with a movie. You can't pause the movie and just, I want to play this empty little carnival game here. I want to click this item, look at it. You can't really do that with a novel, or you could kind of do it with a comic book, but it doesn't really have the same effect.
That being said, I think there are still a lot of video games that have kind of missed the mark and have just sort of tacked gameplay and shooty guns onto movies. Yeah, among others. And so we come back to people wanting money.
Exactly. So, right now, sorry. You have to make money. That's also a sad truth too.
Anything about music or anything about you're not making any money. You're not
Like the only reason why.
Franchises.
You're not being an actor.
Exactly.
You're not gonna have people that want to watch.
And franchises sell.
Yeah, franchises sell.
Franchises sell. Yeah,
That's why we
Spider-Man,
are remaking the Star Wars, the Star Trek movies, because there's a name connection to it. Same as My Little Pony. But we're not at the beautiful period of My Little Pony. We're now at the Dark Age. But what comes after every Dark Age? Look at human history. What comes after the Dark Ages? The Renaissance. Now,
Good class.
we're going to move to the animation Renaissance. I know you guys all were born in this period. But before we move to animation Renaissance, how did it start? Well, back in Japan, we had a very similar Alan Moore-esque character looking at the giant robot anime genre, soap opera type genre, and saying, anime is boring now. It's all giant robots fighting back and forth. I want to kill off the giant robot genre like Alan Moore tried to kill off the superhero genre. You guess who that guy was and what that work was?
You see, he's not in this room, is he?
Exactly. Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Now,
Get
it's
the
good.
robot, Shinji.
Now, Evangelion was kind of the watchman of its thing because they both wanted to end their medium and start a new period where you could experiment with different animated films. Because around this time, animation was against giant robots, but the only animes that sold were Miyazaki films because they were copying the Western Disney style, and Akira, which was copying the Western comic book style. So he was saying, we need to move to new styles. Japan has to invent some new styles instead of copying these old styles. But again, his whole entire thing reinvented the whole, popularized the whole entire giant robot genre.
It pretty much was considered the deconstruction of the giant robot genre.
Exactly. But a lot of these works, Miyazaki's works started coming back to America, and Pixar was like, oh, look how poorly we did with this Oliver Twist movie. Oh. Rescuers Down Under was pretty bad too.
I liked it. Hey.
No, I'm not saying that.
Boy, now we
I think,
No,
fine. Now
you
all
didn't
right.
go there,
You got it.
sister. You didn't go there, sister.
But to a Disney executive making money, it did not bring in the box office draw. You had American Tail and Land Before Time doing it. So we're looking money-wise. So
why there's 8
Disney
billion
were saying,
times.
wait, these Japanese people are actually being influenced by our earlier works. Now we need to be influenced by them. So Disney wanted to do something kind of special. They thought that the traditional drawn animation style was going to die. So they really wanted to end it with a big bang. So they decided, let's try to get all our favorite Disney characters into a movie together. And then they were like, hey, Warner Brothers has some pretty good animated characters. Let's see if we could do a mutual handshake with Warner Bros. And borrow Mickey, Bugs Bunny, and the other guys for a while. And then that's where we get Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yes. One of the only instances you will see Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny in the same scene.
There was such a fight about the screen time amount that they had that it was a strict, it has to be second for second.
Exactly.
The same amount.
Wow.
But that was supposed to be the swan song of the whole entire traditional animated sector of Disney, because right after that movie launched, they started closing down that studio and started making it exclusively for 3D movies and just live action movies. But once the box office draw started coming in, they're like, hey, money, money, money. And then they decided we should reinvest this money and make Little Mermaid. So we have the birth of the Disney Renaissance. Around this same time, John Kay was like, the animation medium is all boring. He-Man is just going hee for 50 scenes. Look at all these crazy. Look at Hasbro making G.I. Joe and Care Bears and My Little Pony simply as giant toy commercials to sell their products. Why aren't animations more animated? Why aren't cartoons more cartoony? Hey, Disney's doing something cool. I'm going to do what they did. So what happened, when we look back at the real Renaissance during the Italian period, what did the Italian Renaissance do? They were looking back at the Greek and Roman Golden Age. So what did John Kay do? He went back and looked at the 40s and 50s Golden Age of animation, looking at Chuck Jones and Tex Avery, all these greats, and he realized if you want to make it an animated medium, you have to do something that live action cannot do. That's why, for some reason, John Kay does not like DreamWorks or Pixar movies. Like, that might be a little controversial, but he actually brings up an interesting point. If you could recreate the sea or a kitchen so realistically that it looks real, why don't you just film a real kitchen instead? You should make a type of animated work that cannot be done with a traditional camera. So that's why he started Ren and Stimpy. If you notice, he had a point. Every single expression, every single scene had to be drawn in Ren and Stimpy, and you could never use the same pose, image, or expression twice. His opinion is animation should be always animated, and cartoon should always be cartoony. And this is where we grew up in.
And boy, did that show make people's eyes bug out of their heads like that.
Exactly. So,
It's a wonder we're not all in jail.
But this is why people, because actually another reason why I added My Little Pony to this. Originally, it did not have My Little Pony in its panel, but then people keep on asking me why I like My Little Pony, why most college-age students of my generation like My Little Pony, and I realized we grew up in the Watchmen Dark Ages. Okay, we grew up we saw what mediums could do. We saw some grim periods, but then we saw beautiful, beautiful works of art. The animation Renaissance and Disney Renaissance, these were really good works. And while previous generations could always say, it was always better during my day, we also came in the period where internet and YouTube was around. So we could compare and say, look, Doug is better than your stupid Johnny Test. And we have proof to show you why it is.
Dexter Slab will always be better. Just for the record.
Apologies to Lee Tokar if he hears that, because he's on the show, you know.
So, look, I talked too much. You guys just speak.
It's terrible.
I was just going
But
to
you
say
guys, we're
Dexter Slab.
moving now to the animation
always
Renaissance.
going to be better.
And that's also the problem, because now we had some really good experimental works. We have Buffy the Vampire Slayer actually making, like, these aren't stiff characters. These are now round, developed characters. They're appealing to different genre groups, age groups, ethnic groups, sexual orientations, stuff of that one.
What about the Tiny Toons?
Oh yeah, the Animaniacs, Tiny Toons. If my panel was if I had my PowerPoint, you would see a giant screen of every single one of these works right here. I don't know why I thought of Doug first. I actually personally did not like Doug's as much.
Say the cartoon of the 90s for me
Yeah.
would have
I
been
think-
Batman the Animated Series.
Batman the Animated Series.
Yes.
Actually, if I was giving this panel at a comic book convention, actually this would be a Batman thing because you could again see you could replace Superman with Batman, you could replace like the animation renaissance with the Batman animated series, and we could replace like you could talk about the new Christopher Nolan Batman films, how you see the rise and fall of all these different things. Exactly. And vampires too. That's another thing we could have talked about. But we are pony fans, so we're going to talk about ponies. Now, the animation renaissance for Disney kind of ended around 1999. And that was when we started working, like CGI was around. That was good because we started making Terminator 2 and Jurassic Park.
Tron.
But once again, once the studios find a way to make things cheaply, they're going to make things cheaply. Exactly. So now CGI, which was supposed to be a new useful tool for expressing creativity, becomes like a bane of the whole entire movie medium. And same as flash animation.
There's a quote from someone, I'm trying to remember who, and I absolutely agree with it, that when you watch an older movie like one of those, or even Little Shop of Horrors, which was made all with very complicated puppetry, you see it and it's like watching a magician. You want to know how they did the trick. It's a trick to get something on the screen.
See? I told you art was like magic.
These days, it's like watching a magician, but you know how they did the trick.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful example. Or the new one's ugly.
Hmm? Yeah. Of course, but we want to rip on George Lucas to watch Mr. Plinkett reviews. We could just watch Mr. Plinkett reviews, so that would actually be very fun to do. But now we come to because after every single, like I said, we looked at Dark Age. After Dark Age always comes a Renaissance, but after every Renaissance comes an Industrial Age, when people want to try and find cheaper ways to make all these works. And after an industrial period, we always have a depression. This is where we get the animation depression. We have Johnny Test. That's just good.
There's more to blame.
Would you like more tea, Scootaloo? This is a lovely party, sweetie.
But we had some interesting things happen. We had you guys know anything about Flapjack?
Yes.
Now, did you know Flapjack is kind of responsible for the new animation revival, not because it was a work that was a new type of animated work, but because the creator of Regular Show, Adventure Time, and Gravity Falls all were working on Flapjack as background animators.
In fact, the creator and voice of Flapjack is on Gravity Falls currently as a recurring character, Gideon. There you go.
Little Gideon. That's me.
It's so crazy that man is like a gigantic Viking, but he has that voice. It makes no sense.
I didn't know that
Yeah.
Church was actually
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I would if I had my actual PowerPoint. I'll have a timeline. And Adult Swim was actually a very big one that really brought back all these. The old Hanna-Barbera shows started coming back, and that brought everything back as well.
You know, Nickelodeon's done some pretty good stuff with the Avatar series.
Yeah, Avatar,
Good
for
point. Yeah.
example.
Who's excited for Korra?
Yeah.
See?
So we are now entering.
Okay, not everybody.
I didn't say anything.
So we are kind of entering now a revival period because this is now around 2008. You have the fantastic Planet animated series, Japanese animation being made. You have Dark Knight Rises being made. You have Obama being voted in. So this was a period of change and revival. People looking back into stuff.
Change.
Change. I actually didn't vote for Obama, so I'm not. So just me bringing up Obama didn't mean anything. But it was a period where people were. I'm not saying that Obama was a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying people were hungry for change. And again, this was a period when YouTube was around, when people of our age could actually say, animation in this period is all flat and dry and flash animation-y. Why isn't it like the animation renaissance? Okay, so that's when we started taking to the forums saying, make shows like this, Nick, make shows like this, Disney. Why aren't you guys doing this anymore?
I'm going to validate my opinions on the internet.
Should we get into the particular forums and the history?
We have to introduce Lauren Faust first. our
Oh.
magical mystery woman of this.
Fine, go
Okay,
ahead.
let me do Lauren Faust. I can't do a Lauren Faust voice. But anyway, she was pitching. She so has. So everyone knows the story how Lauren Faust do it. We don't have to kind of
Galaxy
repeat it.
Girls.
She wanted to redo this whole entire thing. Let's go exactly to 99 years after October 10th, 1911 to October 10th, 2010. Exactly 99 years since the start of our journey. What aired on the hub? But we are actually very pleased to have Gended here because he was on the original boards during this time when this whole entire thing broke out.
I wasn't.
Well,
Ground
you heard the
zero.
story.
The Derpy Squad, the head of Derpy Hob's News, along with a few of the older DHN cast, were back on the forum boards during that day. And the particular forum board that really gets attributed a lot of what created the pony fandom, it is the 4chan image boards. And specifically on the 4chan image boards, it is the image boards, which is the animation and cartoon community. And for those who are not familiar with 4chan, 4chan is a series of image boards, basically. They're like forums, but you can post images along with your text. And 4chan also has the unique feature that you can be completely anonymous while doing it, which creates its own particular brand of culture.
It unleashes
We'll leave it
horrible
at
people.
that.
Oh.
No one should ever
But it
had
started
to go to
on the board since the saw that Lauren Faust was creating a new show, and they already know that they enjoyed her work and her husband Craig McCracken's work on shows like Powerpuff Girls, on Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. And so the buzz kind of started there. There came to be a kind of a general, or eventually there was, and this is kind of passed on information, so I might be getting a little bit of this wrong. But started being flooded with these threads about ponies once the show started airing, because how the board works is that they have all these different threads that kind of react in real time, and the people who post get kind of to the top of the board, and the threads that are getting posted in are at the top of the board. And so was getting flooded with all of these threads about ponies. So there finally came to be a crackdown in the boards, and this was just about the time where I entered the fandom. It was right after. There was a mass banning. And it was across all of 4chan of anything pony related, because ponies were spamming, and this was partially due to it left the board. And it all happened because a particular admin, I don't know his name anymore, but he came on one night and said, "Hey, do you guys mind if we put ponies on B?" And everybody said, "Please God, no, do not do that," and he did it anyway.
Was this shortly after when they just, said to autoban anyone that typed in the word pony?
Well, that's what kind of happened to it, because B got a hold of it and B spread it everywhere. It went to forums, not on the 4chan boards. It went to like the BioWare forums. It was everywhere.
This is of course.
And
Yeah.
so
That's where that came from.
it was, I believe, actually, I'm trying to remember when I exactly entered the fandom. I believe it was fall of 2011.
2010.
Or was it 2010?
It would have been.
It must have
then,
been fall
yeah.
of 2010 then.
So
That was
the
the
term Brony was coined around that time as well.
Yeah.
Where the guy was like, "Thanks, Pony Bro." It was like,
I
"You mean
recently-
Brony?"
Yeah, I recently saw a screen cap of that. Patient Zero, exactly.
Patient Zero. God, that's the perfect name for it, isn't it?
Well, what ended up happening was, since they cut it off, the fandom ended up splitting into kind of different sects. We had the main. Oh well.
Pony-chan wasn't until a little later.
Yeah, it was a little bit later, but it was kind of a result of this main banning and this splitting of the and the 4chan culture. So we had things like Pony-chan, we had Fem-chan pop up for the artists. We had, I'm trying to remember some of the other
Ponyburu?
forums. Ponyburu.
Yeah.
popped up.
If you remember that, kids.
And during this time, like I said, DHN started up. Then Equestria Daily was also, because I believe Sophisto came off of the co-boards. His site started gaining more and more followers and became kind of the popularity giant that it is today. And so the kind of the main division in the fandom, I would say, stems from this original banning from the co-board. Or at least that was the first. The pony fandom has split multiple times since then.
It started. There were a lot of events that started. It was, first of all, it was that one critic who, first of all, criticized My Little Pony before it even aired. That kind of got people racing to the board, saying, "Well, let's prove this guy wrong by
That's right.
actually
Ahmed,
watching this show."
I'm trying to remember his name.
It's not Ahmed.
Yeah, Death is like character-driven.
He's a corporate, like, again, just a giant toy commercial he was comparing it to, where it was the end of creative-driven television, which I would blame Seth MacFarlane for.
And people criticizing the previews saying, "Oh yeah,
I'm a
here's
South Park fan,
racism
I'm sorry.
because they've got black slave ponies." And Mark Fausti's just like, "What are you smoking?" But it was the two. There were still two. It was about the same time.
No, I just brought him because it's only Seth MacFarlane. That's
Never
how I
mind.
believe. Sorry. But no, we're talking about My Little Pony, and it was an interesting year since the show actually started to, I think, exactly 100 years when we started this whole entire story. Because, like, again, we were talking about Equestria Daily and Derby Hoops News, and then we had Pony Chan, and it was really, I think, the first time that not just a show, but a generation of one show actually had its own card Chan board.
And the ponies did eventually return to 4chan in the form of the /MLP board.
When was that? Was a long time later, wasn't it? When was that?
I think that was winter of spring of 2011. I think February. Don't quote me.
And then there was the rise of
Yeah, it was later
MLP
than that.
conventions too.
Oh yeah, that was in 2000.
Yeah, it was much later.
It was quite some time.
But it
ago.
was also the rise of MLP conventions as well, and those again, like BronyCon, I think you guys they just broke records. It's now the 18th largest convention of any kind, not just pop culture or.
That's the
comic
one that
convention.
you're at
It's the
here right
18th
now today.
largest of any kind.
You are
Yep.
here.
But this is
We're at a place.
interesting.
Here's your little red dot
But
right
this, like for example, these pony conventions, like they're bigger than a lot of genre conventions, or conventions for even some mediums, like comic books and animation. Those are mediums. We're not even one show. We are one generation of one show, and we are bigger than mediums. That's kind of crazy at this point.
We're bigger than motor shows. It's
Exactly.
insane.
And
This is stupid.
what was it? Washing machine expos? I don't know. No, actually, I was here for CoinCon. I was actually down that hall, and it was just a bunch of people with coins looking at them.
We have a
Nice.
question.
I think like the comic book, the comic book was outselling Superman comics.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah,
The-
it has hit #1 spot several times.
Actually, before MLP comics came out, the records for the greatest selling comic books across the world were Dragon Ball Z, Spider-Man, and X-Men. MLP tripled. The first issue of MLP, like, basically tripled the averages of all those different works. So it kind of shows how crazy we are as fans, but at the same time, it shows we aren't crazy. But again, as we were listening to the whole entire history, it shows we weren't crazy. We were born at the right time. We were born right after the 80s Dark Ages, during the 90s Dark Ages, when the internet was around, so we actually could compare these new works, vent about them on the internet, and actually influence how shows are being, I guess, directed today.
One thing, and I know you say you don't like Pixar, but
I like Pixar. I like
well,
Pixar. John Kay didn't like Pixar.
that one guy doesn't like Pixar,
Oh, yeah.
but one thing I might attribute it to would be the Toy Story series, because for people growing up in my generation, which I was born in the '90s, the original Toy Story came out in, I believe, 1995.
Yep, 95.
So 1995, the kid, and what was the kid's name?
Andy.
Andy. It's on the
I
boot.
know.
zoned.
But Andy's about 5 years old. I'm about 5 years old. We go on to Toy Story 2, which is about, I think that was about 2001? 99?
99, really? Wow.
I'm no
He's not
expert
good
at
with
that. I'm not good with dates. I was about 10 years old. Andy was about 10 years old. We have Toy Story 3. Andy's going to college. Everybody in that generation is going to college. So this,
Another example is Monsters University.
yes, also that. It's this kind of intergenerational continuity, I would say.
And a lot of other series will do that. Harry Potter did that, grew with its audience. Ben 10 to some extent.
And it's normally great for revivals because if you look
did.
at we
It
were
did,
mostly
yeah,
looking
cool.
at a bit about the comics medium and mostly animation medium, and if you look, it's always usually the revival of people growing up during these periods who actually start these new interesting works. But also that's how the comic Silver Age came about. But that same thing also led again to the comics Bronze Ages because the same people were saying, let's retell the same stories that I grew up loving as a child. I want to relive the same nostalgia.
Sorry.
And retelling the exact same stories that they liked will not appeal to a new generation of kids.
Just artistic rarity, you had a question?
Actually, I was going to use the Monsters, Inc. as an example. They actually had the movie ready, but then held on to it for a little while, saying, this is when we're going to release it, because it fits so well. Because I remember Sleepovers, 13. All my friends were afraid that a monster was going to come out of the closet. Don't know why, my friends were weird. And I literally graduated college. When they went into college, they're like, yes, you can want something and still not be able to get it. And it just spoke to me as a child and as an adult. And it spanned that entire time. They held on to it, knowing what they were doing. Clever ones.
But again, we're talking about how this is a tricky fork in the road because at the same time, again, animation revival, great stuff, but again, might lead to another depression or a dark age because if you're just retelling the same stories, if I keep, like for example, we liked My Little Pony, what if we were given My Little Pony again? We'll just be writing our fan fictions that we liked with our ponies. And while Lauren Fowles did that and made a great show, if we keep on doing that, it's like photocopying the photocopy. It's not going to work. We have to try to innovate and try new things with the stories and characters. Yes.
Can you expand a little bit on what you said about this being the right era? Referring to like technology and everything?
I think it's more of
How everything was.
Yeah, it's more of a. Here's an example of something that my roommate said after we'd seen Wreck-It Ralph. Is he pointed out that there is sort of this motion of films kind of being not only targeted for kids, but also specifically being targeted towards us. Us being the 90s kids, the late 80s kids, who really grew up in that era and will get a lot of jokes and will be really targeted by movies like Wreck-It Ralph.
But
And how kids' movies are getting that way more and more
Yeah.
these days. It's sort of like we're spoiled.
But
we
again,
are.
it's also the same period because most bronies are, again, in the same college age demographic, which means they grew up during the animation renaissance. That's, sorry. Sorry, yeah, that's a, sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry, behind you
Right.
first. Right first, yeah.
Have you noticed how many kids' movies these days have been rated PG? Back in the 90s, that was unheard of. Yeah,
Sorry.
exactly. It's not the rating system that's changed.
Wait. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I guess it's sort of an appeal in that we don't see too many, or maybe we just don't have enough strong female characters. Well, we definitely don't.
Actually, that's one thing that would.
Yeah, I've got a plethora of weak ones.
But that's actually one thing that would be responsible for how the revival was started because it was around 2004, 2006 when Japanese anime started becoming popular again, and they had really strong female characters. You had Lucky Star, Haruhi Suzumiya. Those were the silly slice of life stuff. But then you also had some strong female characters in other works of life. Yeah, that's a good example. And we're realizing, even though these Japanese characters were kind of moe archetypes, they were still really strong and could hold up their own ground, and they could evolve. That's the problem with a lot of shows today. They want to control the characters. The authors and writers want to be smarter than their characters. by allowing the characters to be smart and aware of the situation allows them to actually do things that the author did not originally intend them to do, like My Little Pony characters right now.
Well, like the pony thing, like you take it to fantasy, it's safe.
Yep.
It's a nice safe place to go, but it's still strong. It's still strong for a young female.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with you too.
Something I really like about the My Little Pony show is that it respects, or it holds a lot of respect for its audience, which a lot of shows for its particular audience
Dora the Explorer.
didn't really do. Because a lot of the thinking within animation, within mostly the corporate part of animation, is that girls' television is crap. They eat it up. They don't care. Just put it out there, and people will buy it regardless.
Barbie's Dream Palace.
But
Oh yeah.
yeah.
They weren't stupid. They weren't dumb girls.
Mhm.
They would go out and fight. They would fight well, and they were out there and they did their thing. And they were really cool at it.
And My Little Pony it contains a lot of elements of like mythology and et cetera, et cetera.
And humor that any age could get, not dumbed down humor. It actually spoke up to kids.
Oh, I think we have a question over there.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So they really don't care, like, in fact, even the color coding between pink and blue, between genders, is not really for the benefit of the child, it's for the benefit of a parent to know what to get the child.
Sorry.
I'm sure you know this as well. I can't think of the exact Disney like said once,
We have
you're
like
done and you're dead if you stop writing for kids or something or adults.
But,
Yeah, you're only dead if you write for kids.
yeah. But at the same time, I guess we should wrap up because we only have a few minutes left. But My Little Pony is also an oddity because, like, for example, we had Avatar Last Airbender, which was very popular. Powerpuff Girls was popular. SpongeBob was popular. But you don't see a SpongeBob Con. You don't see a SpongeBob Daily or any of this stuff.
SpongeBob. Oh God. BikiniBottomDaily.com.
Patrick Star News.
So like, how could we have like so many like
All the fish
conventions
that's
a year,
fit to
so many
print.
different websites, conventions, all this stuff, and like. But then like. Yes.
Someone's excited.
One of the magic things to sort of consider to formalize it, unlike all those wonderful cartoon characters like Avatar, which is the wonderful sort of spiritual stuff, SpongeBob has this comedic element, is he adult, is he a child, is he grown? But what My Little Pony does is it allows the fans, in this particular case, which is a whole male stand up, is this being allowed to cross gender normative standards and say, oh, it's through the cartoon, and it sort of proves that we don't really need to challenge this in society. And because this cartoon has allowed us to do it, that's the power we're sort of getting from it. So many men becoming man is really proving that so many men really want to challenge gender normativity.
Absolutely.
And
We can do
last
real
one.
quick.
Last
We need
question.
a last one, yeah.
Let's get a kind of segue off the bird what she was saying a little bit there. What I think of what brings a lot of us together is that when we say, yeah, we like My Little Pony, a lot of people look at us a bit weird. So we try to congregate and come together with people that like My Little Pony.
And,
All right.
yep. So I guess I want to say.
Before we end, I would just like to embarrass someone, if I may. Will Draw for Food. Hey, nice to see you.
yeah, where were you?
Why
Thanks
are
for
your
attending your panel.
Why
Why
have you
are
been
your-
back there?
No.
Half the panel.
Why are your fingernails black?
His deep brooding personality.
I want to thank everyone for joining the panel, and yeah, thank you very much.
And now release you to your Flufflepuff.
If you hurry, you can still catch the last 5 minutes of their panel.
Thank you, Chocopony.
Yep.
Thank you.
And to answer the question, is Alan Moore right? Well, he should just stay in his magic cave and continue smoking weed. That's all I